My phone lit up at 2 in the morning with a stranger's voice telling me my dead wife was alive in a care home 300 kilometers away. 10 years I told people grief teaches you to accept the impossible. It doesn't prepare you for a nurse describing, crack for crack, the exact compass I sealed with epoxy and buried with her body a decade ago. That kind of Halifax cold gets into a truck's cab even with the heater running, and my hands, cracked at the knuckles, smelling of diesel no matter how hard I scrubbed them, were still wrapped around a Tim Hortons cup that had gone stone cold an hour before the call came. I don't even remember why I was still awake. Some nights the shop radio just stays on in my head long after I've locked up. The phone rang. A number I didn't know, area code out toward Fredericton. Mr. Ashcroft? This is Nurse Halloran, calling from Riverbend Continuing Care. A pause, the kind that tells you the person on the other end has rehearsed this sentence and still doesn't believe it. We have a patient here who matches a missing persons file from a decade back. Sir, we believe it might be your wife. Sadie. I didn't laugh. I wanted to. My voice came out flat, scraped down to nothing. That's not possible. My wife is in the ground at the cemetery over the Fundy shore. Has been for 10 years. The nurse didn't argue with me. That was the part that got under my skin. She didn't argue. She just said the woman had no ID, no memory of her own name, had been found wandering near a highway rest stop 8 months ago and only just started responding to questions. Severe cognitive trauma, she said. Long-term memory in fragments. She doesn't speak much, the nurse went on, careful. But she draws. Same thing, over and over, on every scrap of paper she can get her hands on. Draws what? A compass. Cracked glass face, and the crack's been fixed, like somebody filled it in with something clear. Epoxy, maybe. She won't stop drawing it, Mr. Ashcroft. We didn't know what it meant until we ran her through the database and your name came up attached to the old file. The cup slipped out of my hand. I heard it hit the floor mat, felt the coffee soak cold through my sock, and didn't move. Nobody knew about that compass. Nobody. I'd fixed it myself, that busted little Silva compass, epoxy glued the cracked lens back together at my father's workbench the week before I gave it to Sadie on our first camping trip out past Cape Breton, back when she was 31 and laughed at how bad I was with my hands for a man who fixed transmissions for a living. It went into the water with her. It was supposed to be at the bottom of the Fundy with everything else. I sat there with cold coffee soaking through my sock and diesel still under my fingernails, and for the first time in 10 years I didn't know what was true. I started throwing things into a duffel bag before I'd even decided to go. 2 shirts, my father's old flashlight, the truck registration in case anyone asked questions at the border of the province. My hands were shaking in a way they hadn't shaken since the funeral. And somewhere in the middle of all that scrambling I thought, foolishly, that I should call Bridget first. Sadie's sister. The one person left who'd understand what this meant without me having to explain it. Bridget picked up on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep. Aldous? It's the middle of the night, what, they found her. I could hear my own voice cracking open, something I hadn't let happen in years. Bridge, they think they found Sadie. She's alive. She's in a care home in New Brunswick. She's alive. I expected crying. I expected her to ask when we were leaving, whether she should come, whether I needed her to drive. I'd known Bridget for 15 years, since she was a mouthy 19-year-old running the books at her family's boatyard, and not once had I heard the silence that came down the line right then. It stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Bridget? That's not, her voice had changed entirely. Gone thin and fast, climbing toward something close to panic. That's a scam, Aldous. Some sick person is running a scam on grieving families. It happens all the time. Don't you dare drive out there. They knew about the compass, Bridget. Nobody knows about the compass. I said don't go. And there it was, not grief, not disbelief, but something cold and hard slamming down like a shop door. If you go digging this up, if you go around asking questions, I swear to God I will call the police on you myself. The line went dead before I could say another word. I sat in the driveway with the engine idling, snow starting to come down sideways in the headlights, trying to make sense of a woman I'd have sworn on anything would want her sister found before she wanted her next breath. Bridget had spent 10 years lighting a candle every October, had cried at every anniversary dinner harder than I had. And now, the one night there was a real chance, a compass drawn on a stranger's sketchpad, an actual, physical, impossible chance, she wanted me to sit still and shut up. I put the truck in gear anyway. The highway out of Halifax at that hour belongs to transport trucks and men like me who can't sleep. I drove with the window cracked despite the cold, because the cold kept my head clear, kept the questions from swallowing me whole. Somewhere past Truro the sky started to go that flat gray it does before dawn, and I caught myself talking out loud to nobody, the way you do on long hauls. Why would a sister try to stop her own family from being found? That was the one that wouldn't let go of me, turning over and over like a wrench with a stripped bolt, never quite catching. And underneath it, quieter, uglier, the question I didn't want to look it straight on, if the woman lying in that care home in Riverbend really was Sadie, my Sadie, the one who used to hum off-key while she gutted mackerel on the back step, the one whose photograph I still kept taped inside my toolbox lid, then who in God's name had I been bringing flowers to every single October for the past 10 years? The wipers dragged ice across the windshield. New Brunswick was still 3 hours out. I gripped the wheel with both hands, diesel-stained and shaking, and I drove straight into whatever was waiting for me. Riverbend continuing care smelled like every hospital I'd ever hated, bleach laid over something sweeter and worse underneath. Nurse Halloran met me at the front desk, a heavy-set woman with kind eyes and the careful voice of someone who'd delivered this exact conversation before and knew it never went the way people expected. Mr. Ashcroft, before you go in, I need you to understand she may not react the way you're hoping. I don't care how she reacts. I just need to see her. She led me down a corridor with handrails bolted to both walls, past a common room where an old man sat working a jigsaw puzzle with hands that trembled too much to fit the pieces. At the end of the hall, through a half-open door, I saw her. It wasn't like the movies. There was no music swelling, no gasp, no running across a room. Sadie sat curled in a donated cardigan 2 sizes too big, in a chair by the window, staring at nothing in particular. Her hair had gone gray at the temples in a way it never got the chance to when I knew her. 41 years old, and she looked like she'd been carrying stones uphill for a decade. When I stepped into the doorway, her eyes lifted and passed over me the way you'd look at a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong room. My chest caved in on itself. I stood there like a fool, hands still on the doorframe, and I didn't say a single word, because I didn't trust my voice not to break in front of her. Then her nose twitched. Just slightly. She was looking at my jacket, the old canvas one, the one that never comes clean no matter how many times I run it through the wash, soaked through with 10 years of engine grease. Her eyes tracked to my sleeve, and something behind them flickered, there and gone, like a pilot light catching for half a second in a draft. Sadie, I said, so quiet it barely left my throat. Nothing. She looked back out the window. I sat with her for 2 hours that morning and she said maybe 6 words, none of them to me directly. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I would learn her again from nothing if that's what it took. I did not expect Bridget to walk through that door with a lawyer. She came in around noon, dressed sharp in a blazer that didn't belong anywhere near a care home, a thin man in a gray suit trailing half a step behind her carrying a leather folder. Bridget didn't look at Sadie first. She looked at me. You went anyway. She's alive, Bridget. What did you think I was going to do, wait for your permission? The lawyer cleared his throat and stepped forward, setting the folder on the little side table with a soft, deliberate click. Mr. Ashcroft, my name is Desmond Whitlock. I'm here on behalf of Ms. Fenwick. He nodded toward Bridget. We have an emergency medical power of attorney we'd like to file, effective immediately, transferring Ms., the patient's, care to a secure residential facility. You're not putting her anywhere. My voice came out louder than I meant it to. A nurse at the station down the hall glanced up. Aldous. Bridget's tone had gone strange, brittle, pleading and cold all at once. You don't understand what you're walking into. You have no idea what kind of care she needs. She needs specialists, structured environments, people trained for trauma of this. She needs her husband. You've had a psychological trauma of your own for 10 years. It burst out of her sharper than she meant it to, and for a second something raw showed underneath the blazer and the folder and the lawyer's careful phrasing. You think you can just walk in here and play house with a woman who doesn't even know your name? You're not stable enough for this, Aldous, and I am not going to stand by and let me what, Bridget? I stepped closer, close enough that the lawyer's hand twitched toward the folder like he thought I might do something stupid. Let me what? Finish that sentence. She didn't. Her jaw worked, and for just a second her eyes went glassy, and I thought, God help me, I actually thought that she was going to cry and tell me the truth right there in the hallway. Instead she turned to Whitlock. Show him the paperwork. I didn't read a word of it. I stood there with the folder open in my hands and I wasn't looking at the clauses, I was looking at her, at the way she wouldn't hold my eyes, at the way her hands, normally so steady counting invoices at that boatyard office, were shaking hard enough to rattle the pen clipped to the folder. No, I said. I'm not signing anything. And you're not taking her anywhere. You don't have legal standing, I'm her husband. You're a man who buried a coffin 10 years ago and now wants to play hero for a stranger who happens to share her face. Bridget's voice cracked on the last word, and this time it wasn't strategy, it was something closer to fear. She caught herself, pressed a hand to her mouth for a second, and when she spoke again it was lower, almost begging. Please, Aldous. Just, let the facility handle this. Let people who know what they're doing handle this. I'm asking you as family. Then why, I said slowly, watching her face the whole time, are you fighting this hard to keep me away from her? A sister who spent 10 years grieving would be on her knees thanking God right now. You're not grieving, Bridget. You're scared. The color dropped out of her face like someone had pulled a plug. That's absurd, she said, but it came out thin, and she was already turning toward the door, already telling Whitlock they'd revisit this through proper channels, already halfway down the corridor with her heels clicking too fast against the linoleum for someone who claimed she was only doing this for Sadie's own good. I stood alone in that hallway for a long time after they left, the folder of unsigned papers still in my hand, my pulse going hard enough I could feel it in my teeth. Because here was the thing that wouldn't leave me alone, gnawing at the same spot all afternoon while I sat back down beside Sadie's chair and watched her trace circles on the armrest with one finger, a woman scared for her sister's safety fights to give her more help. A woman scared of what her sister might remember fights to keep her quiet. I didn't know which one Bridget was. I wanted, with everything left in me, to believe it was the first. That evening I called Deacon Winnett, a buddy of mine from high school who'd gone into the Coast Guard Auxiliary and now worked some kind of liaison role with the provincial police out of Dartmouth. We'd hauled lobster traps together as teenagers before I ever picked up a wrench for a living, and he was the only man I trusted enough to ask what I was about to ask. I need you to pull the old file, I told him, sitting in the truck in the care home parking lot, engine off, breath fogging in front of my face. Sadie's file. The drowning. 10 years back, out past the Fundy shore. Aldous, that case is closed. Has been for a decade. I know what it says on paper, Deke. I need to know what it says underneath the paper. There was a long pause on the line, the kind where I could hear him deciding whether friendship was worth bending a rule for. I'll see what I can pull. No promises. And Aldous, if there's something wrong in that file, you understand that's not a small thing to go digging up. Whoever's on the other end of it isn't going to thank you. I don't need thanks, I said. I need to know who I buried. I hung up and sat there in the dark with my hands on the wheel, engine ticking as it cooled, and for the first time since the phone rang at 2 in the morning, I let myself feel the full weight of what Bridget's face had done in that hallway, that flicker of fear before the mask came back down. 15 years I'd known that woman. 15 years of Thanksgiving dinners and boatyard invoices and her crying harder than me at the funeral. I didn't want to believe what my gut was telling me. But my gut had never once been wrong about an engine that sounded fine and it wasn't being wrong about this either. 2 days later, Deacon called back. I could tell from the first 3 words of his voice that whatever he'd found, he wished he hadn't. Aldous, you need to sit down for this. I'm sitting. The autopsy report from 10 years ago, the body they recovered off Fundy. It's all here: water damage, decomposition, consistent with a long-term submersion. But there's a line in the medical notes I don't think anybody read carefully back then, because there was no reason to doubt the ID at the time. He paused, and I heard paper shuffling on his end, the sound of a man choosing his next words with real care. It says clearly, no surgical scarring present on the abdominal region. My stomach dropped somewhere below the truck's floor mats. Sadie had her appendix out when she was 19. Big scar. I used to tease her about it. Yeah, Deacon said quietly. That's what I thought you were going to say. Then who signed the ID, Deke? Who walked into that morgue and told them it was her? There was a silence on the line long enough that I thought the call had dropped again, and when he finally answered, his voice had gone flat and careful in the way cops get when they're handing you something they know is going to break your world in half. Bridget Fenwick, he said. She's the one who identified the body. I found her at the boatyard, standing alone on the dock in the gray light of late afternoon, the tide low and the mudflats stinking of salt and rot the way they always do out past the breakwater. The Fenwick family sign above the office door had lost half its paint since I'd last paid it any mind. She was holding a clipboard she wasn't reading, staring out at a half-finished hull propped up on blocks, and she didn't turn around when my boots hit the planks behind her. I know you're here to yell at me, she said. Go ahead. I set the folded copy of the autopsy report down on the railing beside her, the page curling a little in the wind coming off the harbor. No scarring on the abdomen, Bridget. Sadie had a scar you could trace with your finger in the dark. You signed that ID. You knew. She didn't reach for the paper. Her hand stayed wrapped around the clipboard, knuckles white, and for a long moment the only sound was gulls fighting over something down by the fish plant and the hull creaking gently against its blocks. Then she started to cry, not the composed, dignified kind of crying, but the ugly kind, shoulders shaking, the clipboard clattering to the dock boards as both hands came up to cover her face. I didn't kill her, she said, muffled, desperate. I want you to know that first, before anything else. I didn't touch her, I never hurt her, I swear on our mother's grave I didn't do a single thing to put that woman in the water. Then tell me what you did do. She lowered her hands. Her face was blotched red, mascara running in 2 thin lines, and underneath the ruin of it she looked, for the first time since I'd known her, like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Mom was dying, Aldous. Stage 4, the same month all this happened. Dad was falling apart trying to take care of her and keep the yard afloat at the same time, and the yard was already bleeding money. We were 3 payments behind on the marine mortgage. We were going to lose everything Granddad built. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, smearing it worse. And then that call came in from the Coast Guard. A body, recovered off the Fundy shore, matching Sadie's general description. Same height, same build, a ring on her finger that looked close enough. Close enough, I repeated, and my voice came out low and hard, a sound I didn't fully recognize as my own. I went down to that morgue to identify my sister's body, and there was a life insurance policy sitting on Dad's desk worth $500,000, and Mom needed treatment we couldn't afford, and the bank was 3 weeks from foreclosing on everything our family had ever built with their hands. Her voice cracked wide open. I looked at that woman on the table and I told myself it had to be her. I told myself the scar didn't matter, that decomposition could hide things, that I was probably wrong about where I even remembered it being. I lied to myself first, Aldous, before I ever lied to you. You buried a stranger under my wife's name. I buried a stranger so my mother could die with a roof over her head instead of watching the bank take the yard out from under my father's feet while she was on oxygen. Bridget's eyes came up to mine, wrecked and pleading. I am not asking you to forgive it. I'm asking you to understand that I was 26 years old and drowning in 100 different directions at once, And I made a choice I have hated myself for every single day since. I stood there with the wind cutting through my jacket, and I felt two things at once, pulling in opposite directions hard enough to make my chest ache, a fury so old and so deep it had roots in 10 years of standing at a graveside that wasn't Sadie's at all, and underneath that, something I didn't want to feel but couldn't stop, pity, for a young woman who'd made a monstrous choice out of a desperation I could almost picture myself making too, in the wrong year, at the wrong edge of grief. "Please," Bridget said, and now her voice dropped low, urgent, her hand reaching toward my sleeve before she thought better of it and let it fall. "If you go public with this, I lose everything. The insurance company will come after us for the money, they'll press fraud charges, Dad's name will be dragged through every paper east of Moncton. I'll pay for her care. Whatever it costs, whatever she needs for the rest of her life, I'll cover it quietly, I'll sign anything you want. Just don't say anything. Please." I looked at her for a long moment. Somewhere behind me a halyard was slapping against a mast, a thin metal sound carried on the wind. "No," I said. "Aldous. I buried an unmarked grave for 10 years, Bridget. Some family out there has been wondering for 10 years where their daughter went, and you let them keep wondering because it was convenient for yours." I picked the report back up off the railing, folded it once, put it back in my jacket. "I'm not doing this quietly. That woman gets her name back. And Sadie gets to stop being a lie you're all still paying interest on." She didn't argue again. She just sank down onto an overturned crate on the dock and put her face back in her hands, and I left her there, the tide coming back and slow behind me, and I didn't feel triumphant walking away. I felt tired, mostly, and a little sick, the way you feel after you've finally torqued loose a bolt that's been seized for years, relief and ache in the same motion. The paperwork took the better part of 6 weeks. There were investigators, a reopened file, a second family somewhere near Moncton who got a knock on their door that both broke them and finally let them breathe, 10 years too late. Bridget lost the boatyard in the end, the insurance company clawed back what they could, and the fraud charges came, quieter than they might have, because I never went looking for more than the truth. I didn't watch her sentencing. I heard about it from Deacon, secondhand, and felt nothing sharp enough to call satisfaction. I brought Sadie home to Halifax on a Tuesday in March, the house still smelling faintly of the wood stove and salt air the way it always had, everything exactly where I'd left it a decade ago because I'd never had the heart to change a thing. She walked through the kitchen slowly, running her fingers along the counter edge like she was reading Braille, and none of it seemed to mean anything to her. She didn't know the chowder recipe taped inside the cupboard door. She flinched hard the first time the furnace kicked on with its familiar clunk. Some nights she sat up rigid in bed at sounds only she could hear, and I learned to just sit beside her without touching her until it passed. It was slow. It was clumsy and quiet and nothing like getting my wife back. It was more like meeting a woman who happened to be wearing her face, and choosing, every single day, to learn her all over again from nothing. One evening in late April, with the wind coming hard off the harbor and rattling the porch shutters the way it always does this time of year, I sat cleaning grease off my knuckles at the kitchen table while Sadie curled into the old armchair by the window, a blanket pulled up to her chin, watching the dark come down over the water. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the small, cold weight I'd been carrying there for weeks, waiting for a moment that felt right, and I crossed the room and knelt down and set it gently into her open palm. She looked down at it. The little silver compass, its glass face still cracked clean across the middle, the epoxy I'd laid into that crack all those years ago gone slightly yellow with age but holding fast, holding true. Her thumb moved over the seam without me telling her to, tracing the line where broken had become mended, back and forth, slow. And then she looked up at me, really looked, for the first time since Riverbend, and something in her face came unstuck, some small, cautious light finding its way through, and the corner of her mouth lifted into a smile that wasn't whole, wasn't the smile I remembered, but was hers, unmistakably hers, and true. Her fingers closed around the compass and didn't let go. Some nights I still catch myself standing at the workbench in the garage, the same one my father taught me on, running my thumb along a seam of dried epoxy on some other broken thing, a cracked mug handle, a split oar, whatever's come through the shop that week, and my mind goes straight back to that little cracked lens, the one I fixed at 19 without knowing I was practicing for something so much larger. I used to think fixing things was just what I did with my hands because I didn't have the words for what I felt. I'm not sure that's changed. I still don't have better words. I just have steadier hands than I did in March. Sadie knows the chowder recipe now. Not because she remembers it, she doesn't, not really, not the way memory is supposed to work, but because we made it together 9 times before it started coming out right, and somewhere around the 6th try she stopped needing me to read her the steps out loud. That's not the same as remembering. I've made my peace with it not being the same. Some evenings she hums while she does it, off-key, the way she always did, and I don't know if that sound survived in her hands or her throat or somewhere else entirely, and I've stopped needing to know which. The compass sits on the windowsill above the kitchen sink now, where the light off the harbor catches the epoxy every morning around 8 and turns that yellowed seam almost gold for about 4 minutes before the sun climbs too high. I didn't put it there for meaning. I put it there because Sadie asked me to, one gray afternoon, without explanation, and I've learned not to ask her to explain the things she wants anymore. I just do them. There's a second grave out near Moncton now with the right name on it, finally, and a family up that way who got their daughter back in the only way left to give her back. I think about them sometimes, more than I expected to. I never met them. I don't know if I ever will. But I know what it cost to give them that stone, and some nights that's the last thing I think about before I fall asleep, not the boatyard, not the courtroom, not even Bridget's face on that dock. Just a name going back onto the right piece of granite, 10 years late, and a compass on my windowsill that still points true even with the crack running clean across its face.